Hello, this is my project 1. Um, my original pattern is based on an African batik pattern. Batik is a textile art created through the use of wax and dye on a plain cloth. The word batik is derived from the Malay word titik, meaning dot. This root is evident in my pattern. As you can see, you have these giant circles grounded by these central blue dots. This specific pattern is an art piece by Yinka Shonibare, an artist from Nigeria, but was originally born in London. To begin creating my project, I traced this pattern and kept many of these extending lines that were radiating from the center circle. I thought these larger circles were the focus, but it was interesting to see how these lines forced them to interact with each other. I removed some sections and cropped the original pattern, creating shapes out of these extending lines to emphasize the curved paths and interactive lines. This is my final pattern after line weights were applied. For color palettes, I chose a red, blue, and orange analogy scheme first, and just varied the tones, focusing on these warmer shades with the red and the orange, and sparingly using blue for emphasis. For my second color palette, I focused on the original colors with the blue and the yellow, and I also mixed them to create this very soft and toned green for the middle portions. I ended up deciding on a blue, yellow, purple, and black palette. It brings an electric contemporary aesthetic, much different than the original design, and it was inspired by the CMYK printing ink. As I began my relief models, I created various sketch models just to explore the different aspects of the pattern in context of form. A main focus here is the large curved circles tangent to each other. I investigated how they interact at different heights versus the same heights, as well as actually touching as opposed to just appearing to be touching. Additionally, I looked at how each would look as a completed form versus an open plane or having a flat top or a curved sloping edge. I also tested different ways to contrast these large curved shapes with smaller lines that cut through the z-axis, and for that I just tried to use different materials such as paper and also spaghetti. My final relief 5x5 model emphasizes the tension between those large curved paths at the top of the sides. By incorporating the tall bamboo column, I'm able to break that tension, creating a divide between these structures. Additionally, the large curved planes felt too heavy and consumed the majority of the space, so I began to carve outlines instead of adding in more material. This opens up this tight space and exposes the internal aspects, such as these layered circles just beneath the largest circles cutouts. More lines were included through crossing the space and guiding the viewer's attention from the top and bottom and back up again, and that can be seen right here in this corner. Overall, it's a very enclosed space, but it manages to maintain that feeling of openness through all these different cutouts and the way each piece works together to frame different angles of the space. My final 10x10 space, designed for my relief model and the original pattern, was developed by focusing on the key elements of what makes a space. This includes a path, an entry and exit, and the view of a focal point. The pathway requires implied movement such that a visitor clearly understands how to move through a space without any necessary signage. My ceiling doesn't encompass the entirety of the space, so I use this curved gap here to create the basis of my walkway. It is narrow and it guides one directly through the space, but that narrowness is balanced out by an open space above. And it also includes this kind of combination of curved versus linear that I have throughout, and you have the curves that create the edges, but the movement itself is very straightforward and just cuts directly through. The entry and exit distinguish themselves by the bamboo columns that create the edges of each. It's very reminiscent of a doorway without actually physically having a door in that space. Once you have entered the space, I mentioned before the tightness of the walkway, and I kind of keep that sensation continued when you turn directly to your right after the entry and sit on the curved bench. The ceiling is lowest here, and the wall cocoons the visitor and directs them directly towards the focal point, which is the well across the walkway. This bench gives you the direct eyesight of the wishing well, and the well brings motif of the petite dot back with its physical shape itself, as well as the wheels that line it, and it creates that refreshing cutouts that you can see in the walls as well. In addition to the well, the viewer may witness the play in light that is throughout the model. It reflects the pattern of dots with the radial lights on the one side, and it can be seen on the opposite side, not in light form, but the bamboo represents the pattern as well, just above the bench. And this protrudes outward, creating a much more tangible look at a pattern for the visitor. The space is about tightness and relief balancing each other out while closely dictating the visitor's movements. Even the well is tightly bound by an outer shell, yet inside it sinks deep into the floor. showing a non-exposed space. I began the drawing process by blocking my major components out in pencil and tracing it with a thin micro pen before including the line weights. I kept the 3x4 inch grid on the floor, not 3x4, a 3/4 inch grid on the floor and ceiling plan, just so I knew I was accurately positioning everything. And once I completed the floor plan, I was able to use the plan itself along with trace paper to accurately mark off the objects for my section cuts. Here are my final drawings, starting with the floor plan and the ceiling reflection above here, and they are both drawn at 3/4 of an inch scale. I chose to cut my floor plan a little bit higher than 4 feet because I very much wanted to include these window cutouts. I think it's good for orienting someone in the space as well as judging the location for the objects that were in the space. Below, I have my 2 section cuts. On the right is where my floor plan, where on my floor plan that I chose to cut, the red line representing the first section and the blue line representing the second section cut. This concludes my Project 1 pattern and model designs. Thank you for listening.